Have been part of Faith Promise for pretty much the 35 years that we've attended Bethel Baptist Church. And, we were young Christians when we started, and so it was all brand new to us. But I remember the pastor getting up and saying, do something. Do something. Even if it's $1 a week, do something. Everybody do something. Start somewhere. And so we started out very, very small, but as we grew, our faith matured, our faith grew, and we saw God do things that were unexplainable, other than it was a God thing. And so I'm excited to preach this message. I preached one other time on Faith Promise. Forget, it was a number of years ago. And so it was just good to go back and study this. I want to prepare Brother Mike. I thought this goes right along with farming. Okay, our message this morning. And it'd be great for you and I to do a little interview this morning. So a little bit into this, and it doesn't have to be anything profound, but I think Faith Promise is so similar to farming, planting and reaping and all of that. And so, doesn't have to be. I don't want you to be nervous or anything, but we're just going to talk about farming and how that works, and I think it'll be good for us. I would like for us to go to 2 Corinthians chapter 9. That's going to be my text this morning. 2 Corinthians chapter 9. While you're turning there, our church went to online giving, so you can do it both ways. Well, I'm kind of a techie person, and it made sense to me, and I signed up. I just set it so it would recur every other week, and Faith Promise was in there, and my regular tithe, and so I just kind of walked away and forgot about it. Well, somewheres along the line, and I didn't even realize it happened, it stopped taking out of my account, and it was a big deal to me because that's a very important part of what Esther and I have done. Never missed, ever missed a single week of giving in 30 some years. And so one morning I was just like, I couldn't even sleep. I woke up and I was like, I just know it hasn't been coming out. And I went into my Quicken and I looked back, and here it was like back in July. It had stopped taking out. And it was just a real letdown to me. And I thought, and it was interesting because in November, exactly 1 year ago, this month, we paid our house off, and so we've not had any payments to make. We didn't have to make any car pay. Have not had car payments in years, but no house payment. Oh, it felt so good and so free. And I went to the chairman of the board. I said, the thing that excites me, I think, the most is that it frees us up to give more when the need arises. But this summer, this is really weird, and I'm just sharing from my heart. This summer, I said, Esther, I don't know what's going on, but it just seems like we can't keep up. We have not had any house payments, but we're struggling to keep up. We're having to pull from our savings to help keep up, and I don't understand it. And I think, now I know that I just found out like 2 weeks ago that it wasn't being taken out of our account, and how I missed it, I have no idea, but just too busy, I guess. But I really believe, Pastor, that it could be because I believe in the reaping and sowing. I really believe that with all of my heart, and that's what we're going to read here. But I believe that we weren't sowing, we did it innocently. But I think because we stop sowing, when we do, right, there's no crop, right? Yeah. And so I don't know, it's still a little early. I'm still trying to figure all that out. But in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, and we're going to read verse 5 through 8. Therefore, Paul says, I thought it necessary to exhort the brethren that they would go before unto you and make up beforehand your bounty, whereof you had noticed before, that the same might be ready as a matter of bounty, and not as of covetousness. But this I say, he which soweth sparingly shall reap also sparingly, and he which soweth bountifully shall reap also bountifully. Every man according as he purposes in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver. I love that. You want God to love you? I want God to love me, and that's one thing we can do that causes him to love us, a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, and that ye also, having all sufficiency in all things, may abound to every good work. So there's the text. Now, the faith promise. Faith promise, this is from my own experience. This is just because I know that the scriptures are true. Faith promise will increase your faith. It will strengthen your trust in God. If you would like to have a deeper, stronger relationship, a more meaningful one that strong in your faith, then faith promise will do it. Faith promise has sent many a missionary into the field. I know this church has supported and loved to support missions. It is at the top of your list. So it is at my home church. Our pastor, I'm my pastor's Timothy. So he called me up this week and he said, Joe, in a few days, I'm going to be celebrating 40 years of ministry, and you are my Timothy. And I want you to go up and share about that relationship that we've had. But one of the things that my pastor has taught us and taught me is to be involved in missionary work, because Jesus himself did just that. When he came to us, he came to the mission field, and his heart was the mission field. Faith promise has connected many souls to the creator of the universe. Faith promise is behind that. Faith promise has done that. What faith promise is not, it is not, at least from my understanding and my experience, it is not making a pledge or a vow to the church. You sign nothing. It's faith promise, not a pledge or a vow. Faith promise is no one will call you to collect. Okay? Faith promise is not part of your regular tithe and offerings. Faith promise is above and beyond, and it's that part where, when it comes to tithe, God kind of gave us this 10% thing. Okay, we kind of know. He didn't say 30% or 40% or 50%. He said 10% was the tithes. But faith promise has no limit. There's no ceiling. That's up to you to decide what that will be. Faith promise is waiting on the Lord for clear instruction. I liked when Pastor said that figure jumped out at him. That's what we always pray for. And just because you gave this much last year may not mean that God will give you the same amount for this next year going in. Faith promise is it must be carried out by faith that God will supply. Not only for the faith promise that you're committed to giving, but all of the other things that have not taken place yet. We don't know what's going to happen between now and next year, or the end of next year. We don't know. All kinds of things could happen. We could end up in the hospital. We could lose our job. There's so many things that could take place over this next year. But when we make this promise to God, we are doing so by faith. And we're trusting that He will provide, He will supply for whatever is in store. Faith promise is between you and God. We don't broadcast it. It's between you and God. And if you decide you cannot give as you promised, then you tell God. It's between you and Him alone. At this point, I would like to go to Matthew chapter 14. I'd like to look, and these are just some passages that I thought about this morning as I was praying and going over my notes this morning. In Matthew, this is so unexplainable. This is why it's so profound and so powerful when we read it. But in Matthew chapter 14, go to verse number 17. Matthew 14, verse 17. All right, so this is about the 5,000. We're going to start at verse number 17 and read through verse 21. But this is a picture of faith promise here. Verse number 17 starts out, and they say unto him, we have here 5 loaves and 2 fishes. So you know the background, right? There's a whole multitude of people, and they had been listening to Jesus. And they were so into it that they had forgotten about food. And so suddenly there was a period of time where they realized, hey, it's a long ways back home. We don't have any food. And we're hungry. And I'm sure they probably thought it's such an interruption that if we go home and eat, then we lose out of what's going on here. And so there's probably all these things that crossed their mind. But in verse 17, we have here 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And Jesus said, bring them hither to me. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass. And he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes. And looking up to heaven, he blessed and brake and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And they did all eat, and when they were filled, they took up the fragments that remained, 12 baskets full. Let me read. And they that had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So, how do you explain that? How do you explain that? Yeah, God. 2 fishes and 5 loaves. And when it was all done and over with, there were 12 baskets completely full. Each apostle had a basket, and they kept giving out, and they kept giving out. And when the last child, the last woman, the last man was fed, they had a full basket left over. That goes right along with what we're talking about this morning, faith promise. You cannot explain it any other way but God. Now, it's interesting to be on this side of that miracle because we look at that and we weren't a part of it. But when we're going through that experience, or right before it or while we're going through it, it's not always easy. It's easy now to look back and read it and say, wow, what a miracle that was. But we forget that that same God that did that same thing in that setting is the same God that we serve in this setting.
Yeah, come on.
It's no different. Nothing has changed. Some of us have gotten it. Some of us really believe it. Some of us have experienced it. And some are just beginning to get into it and experience it. And let me tell you, you cannot outgive God. You cannot do it. Impossible. Now go just a chapter over. I think it's in chapter 15. And we're going to look at verse 32. Chapter 15 in verse 32. This is the very next chapter, so this happened soon afterward. Again, there were 4,000 people, and they were without food. Verse 32, then Jesus called his disciples unto him, and he said, I have compassion on the multitude, because they continue to be with me now for 3 days. Okay, they've been together for 3 days. They have nothing to eat, and I will not send them away fasting, lest they faint in the way. And so this is what he did. And his disciples said unto him, when should we have so much bread in the wilderness, as to fill so great a multitude? And Jesus said unto them, how many loaves do we have? Right back. I wonder if any of these had been in the first group. I mean, by now, if they were, they're like, well, what? Seven loaves and a few fishes is what they had. And he commanded, in verse 35, he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves and the fishes, gave thanks, broke them, and gave it to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And they did all eat, and they were filled. And they took up of the broken meat that was left 7 baskets full. And they that did eat were 4,000 men, beside women and children. And he sent away the multitude, and took ship, and came to the coast of Magdala. There you have it again, twice, back to back. Brother Mike, would you come up here? I do not want to embarrass you at all. Thinking of these scriptures, my friend, I love this guy so much. You're about a foot taller than I am, but I think I'm the short guy. But I do. I mean, after yesterday, it was so special what you did. Oh, that was so special. I will never forget that. That will be a memory that I will take back home from Shingle House, and we have many memories from this place. But Mike, you are a farmer, and can you and this again, this is nothing like big profound. We already know, but if I give you a kernel of corn, and you take that kernel of corn, what happens? Let's pretend you're wanting to plant an entire field, and you have a handful of kernel of corns. Explain what happens after that. What do you do? What's involved? And how does all that happen that one day you go back out there with a combine?
Well, if I can give you a picture, an acre of corn is about 200 feet by 200 feet. We didn't rehearse this, did we?
No, we didn't.
So, but on that, I would just say it'd probably take about a half a pound of corn to plant an acre. But after you harvest that, a good average around here would be 100 bushel.
100 bushel.
Now, if you go to Iowa, the average in that state is 200 bushel to an acre, because they have much better ground there. But does that answer your question?
It does.
Good.
That's exactly. Now, how does it work? Now, you have cattle, right? So could we use this same sowing and reaping with, you have, what, 1 bull and 5 cows?
25 usually
You have 25 cows.
to a bull.
And what happens after, how does that increase?
Well, then obviously when you breed those cattle and they each have a calf, you go from 25 cows to 50 head.
Mm-hmm.
It's double.
So you double, and those 50 turn into 100, right?
Unless we eat them.
Unless we eat them. But you could
You couldn't eat all that though.
Yeah, couldn't eat all of
You
it.
couldn't eat all that.
But if you take that, how many bushels, 100 bushels in Pennsylvania, did you say, of corn?
To an acre, yes.
To an acre.
200 feet by 200 feet is an acre.
Okay. So if you took that 100 bushel of corn and you took those 50 cows and you went back out and replanted that, it would go to 200 bushels, right?
I don't know what the numbers would be.
No, it would, no. Oh, yeah, corn would be unbelievable, right?
Yes.
But it's the idea of sowing and reaping.
Yes.
That's all I wanted. Thank you, brother. We do that every day, and we don't even think about it oftentimes. But that is how faith promise works. I am totally convinced you cannot explain it other than God. I was thinking of children and grandchildren. I remember it was not uncommon for a older couple to have upwards to 150 grandchildren in the Amish community. That was pretty common. They lived to be 65, 75 years old. They could have as many as 150 grandchildren. It's the reproduction. And so, looking at 2 Corinthians chapter 9, the one who sows into faith promise understands where his money comes from in the first place. He understands. He gets it. The money that I have is not my money. It's very important to understand that. We're going to look at that a little bit deeper later on. The one who sows into faith's promise understands the level of sacrifice that is involved. It doesn't happen on its own. God uses us. When we went all over the place with Mike and Terry yesterday, I realized there's a lot of work here, a lot of work and labor that goes into this, but the results are worth it. I've never seen a farmer's wife drive up those hills and through those ruts. Wow! I said most men wouldn't do what Sister Terry does. And she kept right up with Brother Mike. It was unbelievable. They were used to flying around on those hills out there, checking on cattle, doing whatever needs to be done. The one who sows into faith promise understands that he or she is investing God's money, that which he has already given us, into God's business. And investing that God-given money into lost people who are headed to hell. We don't hear a lot about hell anymore, but let me tell you, that doesn't mean that hell is no longer a problem. Hell is real. And I had to do a session in New York on the Anabaptist movement, the Reformation and the Anabaptists, and so I had to study. And one of the things that was going on, the corruption that was coming out of the state church back in Germany and Switzerland and that part of the world, is that they believed that a member of the church could pay money to the church, and depending on how much money they paid, how often they paid, and prayed they could have God pull that soul out of purgatory, which was like a sort of a place where a temporary place. And I thought, I had read somewhere where they thought purgatory lasted 12 months, like 1 year. The more money you paid in, the sooner that God would pull that person out of purgatory. But later a guy came up to me and he said, that's not correct. They believed that purgatory could last for 100 years, maybe a couple hundred years. But the bottom line is the church had become so corrupt, they said the more money you give us, the quicker that soul will be pulled from purgatory. But that is not true, and we know that. When somebody dies without Christ, they go to a place called hell for all of eternity. It never lets up. It's forever and ever and ever. And I'm not saying this to make you feel what the word is. I'm letting you know that when you give toward faith promise, there's that opportunity for a missionary to go out, share the gospel, and that person gets saved and will not have to go there. That's simple. In Matthew chapter 6, you don't have to turn there, but we're clearly told, Jesus told us, lay not up for yourselves treasures on earth. We've all got to watch of ourselves. I think of technology. I remember a day, I'm not there, and I probably wouldn't even share this if I was still there. I'm thankful that I'm not there. I was very convicted at some point that I always thought I had to have the latest and greatest phone. If my 2 years or whatever it was that you got your phone and then every 2 years you upgrade it to the next one, I always thought I had to have that next new phone. And I followed some of the things that came out. You know, this is such a faster phone and it's such a better phone. And I came to the point where I said, that phone does nothing more than the one I have. And if I get rid of this phone and pay all that money, and they're not expensive, or they're not cheap, they're $1,000 to $1,200 for a new phone. It's ridiculous. But I got caught up in that. I thought I had to have that. And it goes right along with Matthew chapter 6, verse 21. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon the earth, where moth and rust does corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But rather, it says, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. When we are giving the faith promise, that is sending on ahead of us treasures in heaven, where neither moth or rust does corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. There is absolutely nothing on this earth that is secure or lasting, unless, like Brother Mike said yesterday, our soul or the Word of God. Anything else will not last. It's not secure. Everything is aging and decaying. And it's wasting away. Everything is temporary. And I don't know, Lord, forgive us for getting so caught up in this temporary world. Forgive us for getting our eyes off of the world that is lost. Forgive us for not getting behind faith's promise the way we should. Help us, Lord. I pray that today you would change every one of our minds. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 6. But this I say, he which soweth sparingly shall reap also sparingly, and he which soweth bountifully shall reap also bountifully. There are two kinds of sowers, my friend. Two kinds. There's the one that sows sparingly and the one that sows bountifully. I want to share something that I've noticed in traveling from church to church. Probably one of the first churches that we ever got to that I really noticed it was this church right here, Grace Bible Independent Baptist Church. I remember coming here, and the reason I was so impacted by this church is that I began to realize that this was a generous church. Generous people are generous in many ways. People who give generously to Faith Promise, people who get behind missionaries generously, are generous lovers. It just goes with the territory. And I can tell you, as a missionary, are you with me on this? Brother Jeffrey, Brother Dale? When you walk into a church, within minutes, you know whether this is a generous church or not. You just feel it. I've gone into churches where nobody has come up, nobody has introduced themselves. You go in, you know what you need to do, you set up, and sometimes we leave and we ask each other, did you know who was the pastor's wife?
That's right.
Yeah, like we don't even know who the wife was. And we don't know any names when we leave. But then you go into churches like Grace Bible, and I'm telling you, the story is completely different. I love being around generous people.
Amen, brother.
And that's true as Dale as well. Brother Dale, you work at a grocery store. When we put that bulk food store up there for the ministry, I didn't know anything about groceries. I didn't even know anything about retail, but I had to learn some. And so I went to some of the vendor shows just to learn. And the thing I walked away with is be generous. When you dip an ice cream cone, you give them the biggest ice cream cone they ever got. When you make a sandwich for them, you put as much meat and cheese and lettuce on there until that thing can't come together. Because those people will remember generosity. They don't mind paying the price. We love generosity. There's just something about that store that Brother Dale runs. When you go there, he is a generous man. And they spread that around. And other people learn and they go there because they know when they go there, it's all about generosity. Our God has been very, very generous to us. He has not just given us bits and pieces, He has overwhelmingly given us of Himself. He is a generous God, and we are His people. We are His family, and so we ought to be generous, just like God. Two kinds of sowers. There's those who sow sparingly and those who sow bountifully. There's also two kinds of reapers. Those who harvest small crops. I'll say this again. Missionaries, we know. And this is just something that we talk about as missionaries. It seems like the ones that are the ones that give sparingly, give just little pieces, and they require a lot back.
Yes.
I don't know why it is like that. It's like we give $20 a month. We're part of MAP. And I'm not at all saying I'm not thankful for the $20. But they expect us to come once a year and do 3 services, you know. That's just part of the plan. I mean, that's the other part of people who give little. I just don't like. I just don't want to be that way. I'll put it that way. I don't. I want to be a generous, liberal, bountiful giver. I love to give, and I know you guys do. Go to Proverbs, real quick. Go to Proverbs, chapter 3. I remember when Pastor first started talking about tithing. For the longest time, I thought it was tithing from your net. And that was tough. That was, we were just barely making it, finally getting on our feet. But the preacher preached, tithe, and watch God do something. And so I remember as if it was yesterday, when we finally reached that point where we were tithing on our net. And it was that way for years. And then it occurred to me one day that he's probably talking about gross, right? Not net. I remember when it occurred to me, I was really convicted. I was convicted because I hadn't thought about it earlier, but I was like, wow, Lord, that's a jump for us. That is quite a jump. If you tithe and give your offerings before Uncle Sam gets all of his, it's quite a bit more. But obviously, when I realized that, I said, absolutely, we need to give from or go by the gross. Proverbs chapter 3, and look at verse 9 through 10. Honor the Lord. Honor him. How can you honor the Lord with thy substance? You do that with your substance. That's realizing that your substance is what he's already given you. Honor the Lord with thy substance and with the first fruits of all thine increase. With the first fruits. That's the part right there. That's gross, right? That's under the first fruit. Before anything is taken out. Honor him with the first fruits of thine increases. So, and this is the result, so shall thy barns be filled with plenty, and thy presses shall burst out with new wine. How is that possible? God. Amen. It's the only way. To an unbeliever, or to a man or a woman that has little faith and doesn't believe this program, that doesn't make sense. But I would like to challenge you that if you are not giving what God is asking you to give, I would challenge you to try this. And you won't, not a single one of us in here will do it because we want overflowing barns. That's right. Yeah. That's the result of it. Right. But that has never been my goal as to why I give. But he's simply saying, if you give of your first fruits, and if you honor the Lord, then your barns will be filled with plenty. Now head over to Proverbs chapter 11. You're already in Proverbs, just a couple chapters further. Proverbs chapter 11, and look at verse 24. There is that scattereth. There's the man and the woman that scattereth. Think of sowing seeds, and yet increases. Okay, doesn't make sense. And there is that withholdeth, okay, more than is meet, but it tendeth to poverty. So Brother Dale, he makes $100. I'll take myself. I make $100. Brother Dale gives $50 to God. I give $1. Brother Dale's barns are overflowing. And Brother Joe's barn has led to poverty. How is that possible? God. We don't have to know all the details other than that is what God said. And that is how it works. Everything we have. Go to Romans chapter 11. Real quick, go to Romans chapter 11. I'm realizing that we're at that point where we need to wrap it up. But Romans chapter 11, y'all know this, but it's good to read it. Verse number 34, 35, and 36. Everything we have is a gift from God. Amen. Verse number 34, Romans 11. For who has known the mind of the Lord? Who has known the mind of the Lord? Or who has seen, or who has been his counselor? Or who has first given to him? I underlined that and highlighted that. Who has first given to him? And it shall be recompensed or paid back unto him again. Verse 36, for of him and through him and to him are all things, to whom be glory forever. Amen. Your strengths, your job, your money, your talents, your gifts, your salvation, your family, your car, your home is all God's. It's all belongs to God. Brother Mike said this over and over yesterday, and it stuck. All of this belongs to the Lord. All of what he showed us yesterday belongs to the Lord. God alone is the source, the means, and the end of all things. That's what he's saying there in Romans chapter 11. How we sow from what God has given to us reveals our level of commitment to God. It really does. It reveals our level of faith in God. Back to 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 7. Every man, according as he purposes in his heart, so let him give. Some of you have not gotten to the place where pastor and his wife have gotten to. Some of you will need to figure that out, and you will make that choice today. Every man, according as he purposes in his heart, so let him give. Not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver. I believe, along with what my pastor used to say, everybody in this place, when our children were just really young, we put 3 jars. One, if they made $1, 10% of that went in the first jar. Before anything else, it went into this jar. Then they put some in savings, and the rest went into spending. To this day, both of our children are huge givers to ministries. It started out young. And I would challenge you, if God has given to you children, it's very important to teach and prepare and train them as soon as you possibly can. Everyone, every man, it says, everyone at Grace Bible should get involved. As he purposes in his heart, remember the desperate needs of the world. Missionaries are waiting to go on the field. The lost are searching for truth. People are dying every day and going to hell. And not grudgingly, he says. And it means don't do it out of sorrow. Don't do it reluctantly, out of regret. What good is that? Here's my $100. The pastor wants me to give. And so I've given. You'd be better off keeping your money. Because God is more interested in your heart than he is in that $100 bill. He can make as many $100 bills as he wants. He doesn't need your $100 bill. He wants your heart. Not grudgingly or out of necessity. Don't, just because I stand here and pressure you, or the pastor or the deacon pressures you, don't give out of pressure. Don't give because you fear others will think less of you. Don't give just to please others. Not out of necessity means that just so others stop pestering you. Or gifts out of desire for personal honor and recognition. I have one donor. I love the man. I really do. Love the man. We've been very close over the years. God has blessed him tremendously. But he's the kind of person that is always liked for everybody to know when he gave. He not only wanted everybody to know that he gave, he wanted everybody to know how much he gave. And that always bothered me. Now, I think the man's saved. I truly believe that. But other people talked about it all the time. Why does he have to let everybody know that he gave and how much? You know what I think? I think he got his honor here on earth, if that's the right word. He got his glory here on earth. I don't think it's going to be there for him in heaven. I honestly don't think. Because it's how we are to give. God loves a cheerful giver, one who gives joyfully, willingly, and cheerfully. And then it says that God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that you always have I'll have to remember that. that was good, Pastor. That he always, where I'm at now. Having all sufficiency in all things may abound to every good work. I'm going to end with this testimony. I shared it with you earlier this week. This man that gave the MAP ministry $105,000 to pay the sewer off, when he first called me, he said, now I want you to know that I'm just a man that wears jeans and t-shirts. Nobody would ever know that I even had this property. Nobody would ever know that I would be willing to give this much to pay your sewer. And I don't want my name ever brought out, ever, because it's not about me. And he just sat on the other end of the phone just weeping. He was just crying. He was so sure that God had called him, just like he called me into the ministry. God called him to pay this sewer off. It was so clear. He couldn't sleep. He and his wife couldn't stop talking about it. They were so confident that this property needed to be sold to pay that sewer off. And I didn't know how to respond to that. I felt all kinds of emotions. First of all, I felt very humbled. I felt humbled because this man was willing to be obedient to Christ and his calling, but I felt humbled to God that he would do such a thing. But when he finally sold the property the same morning, he called me. He said, I've already written out the check. And he just couldn't get done. He just felt so good. It felt so awesome that he, as a plumber, could pay this sewer off. And a couple days went by. We received it in the mail, and I called him right back up. I said, I just opened your envelope. I want you to know we received it. And he said, now, Joe, there's more money. And he said, if you find out that there's not enough there, all you got to do is let me know, and I'll write whatever it takes to pay it off. And by the end of our conversation, because there had been a few, engineering bill that had come up that we didn't know about. It was $8,000, and this was above and beyond the $120,000. So I just threw it out there, and he said, $12,500 check in the mail. Now, I think when I get home, it will be there probably on Monday. But this was the generosity of this man. I think he felt more blown away than maybe even I was. I mean, not that I wasn't blown away. Let me tell you, I was so blown away, but it was because I had been angry with God. I was like, how could you do this to us, Lord? This is enough to make us stop sending Bible lessons out. That's where my heart is. I thought that's where your heart was at, Lord. But what God taught me in all of this was unbelievable.
Come on.
He and I both, we sat there and wept together on the phone. I wept because I had underestimated my God. I wept because I had sinned against God. I didn't trust Him. I didn't think He could do it. He was weeping because God called him, and now he was able to give. And so the both of us just sat there and wept. And in the end, he prayed, I prayed. He praised God, I praised God. It was unbelievable. Oh, Lord, don't let me forget that. Don't let me forget that. You know, if our bill would have been $500,000, it would have been the same deal. I'm totally convinced of that. Whether it doesn't matter, whatever it is that you're up against, give generously. Give generously. The missionaries are waiting, and our world is waiting. We have the answer. God has given us much. Pastor.